My mother-in-law threw me out like trash, calling me a poor village girl who didn't deserve her son. She replaced me with a billionaire's daughter before the divorce was even final. But what she didn't know, I was the one who built her son's empire from nothing, and now I was about to take it all back. My name is Adana, and for 7 years I lived a lie that everyone believed was the truth. I was the quiet wife, the obedient daughter-in-law, the woman who stayed home and cooked elaborate meals while my husband Olumide built his empire. That's what his mother Ngozi wanted everyone to see, a traditional wife who knew her place, a woman who smiled politely at family gatherings while the men discussed business. But here's what nobody knew, not even my own husband. Every single line of code that powered his logistics company, every algorithm that tracked shipments across West Africa, every system that made him millions, I wrote it all. Late at night, while he slept peacefully, believing he was a genius entrepreneur, I was hunched over my laptop building his entire world from scratch. I met Olumide in university. Back then, he had dreams bigger than his abilities, and I had the skills to make those dreams real. When he told me about his business idea, I didn't just encourage him, I became his secret weapon. I created everything under a pseudonym, funneling the profits through accounts that made it look like he was the mastermind. His mother never knew I had a degree in software engineering from one of the best schools in Nigeria. She never knew I came from a solid middle-class family with educated parents. All she saw was a woman she could mold, a woman she could control, a woman she could eventually replace. And she called me that village girl with so much venom in her voice, like I was dirt she couldn't scrape off her expensive shoes. I should have seen it coming. The way she looked at me started changing about a year ago. The compliments stopped, the criticism increased. She'd visit our home and inspect everything like I was a housemaid she was about to fire. But I loved Olumide. I truly did. I thought we were partners, even if he didn't know the full extent of my contribution. I thought marriage meant we were building something together. I was so incredibly wrong. The day she walked into our home with Chidima, I felt my entire world tilt sideways. Chidima was stunning, draped in designer everything, her skin glowing like she bathed in gold. Ngozi didn't even greet me. She just looked at me with this cold satisfaction and said the words that would change my life forever. This is Chidima. Her father owns half the telecom industry in this country. She's the kind of woman my son deserves. You need to pack your things and leave. I actually laughed. I thought it was a sick joke, but then I looked at Olumide and his face told me everything. He wouldn't meet my eyes. This man I had spent 7 years with, this man whose entire success I had engineered, stood there like a coward and let his mother destroy our marriage. I found my voice and asked him directly, "Olumide, what is this? Tell me this isn't real." He finally looked at me and his words cut deeper than any knife could. "Adana, you're a good woman, but you're too simple for where I'm going. You never contributed anything to my success. Chidima understands business. She's on my level." Too simple? Never contributed anything? Those words echoed in my head like a curse. I wanted to scream the truth right there. I wanted to tell him that without me, he was nothing. But Ngozi stepped forward, and before I could react, her hand connected with my face in a sharp, stinging slap that made my ears ring. "Don't you dare argue with me, you ungrateful village girl. My son gave you everything, and this is how you repay us? Get out of this house." They gave me 24 hours to pack my life into boxes, 24 hours to erase 7 years like they meant nothing. I watched Chidima walk through my home, touching everything with her perfectly manicured nails, rearranging my furniture, laughing with Ngozi about redecorating plans. She even put on my apron, the one I wore every Sunday when I made Olumide's favorite pepper soup, and twirled around like she was trying on a costume. Olumide watched her with this look of admiration I hadn't seen directed at me in years. When I finally closed the door behind me with my single suitcase, I let myself cry for exactly 10 minutes in the taxi. Then I wiped my tears and smiled for the first time in days, because they had made the biggest mistake of their lives. My small apartment was nothing compared to the house I'd just lost, but it had something that house never had: freedom. I set up my laptop on the tiny kitchen table, logged into my admin accounts, and there it was. Every single piece of code I'd ever written, every password, every backdoor, every system that made Olamide's company function. And then I started digging deeper, curious about the woman who had replaced me so easily. What I found made my blood run cold and my smile grow wider at the same time. Chidima wasn't just some billionaire's daughter, she was a predator with a pattern. 2 previous marriages, both ended in financial ruin for the husbands. One man lost his pharmaceutical company, another lost his real estate business. The court documents were all there if you knew where to look, and I knew exactly where to look. Chidima would marry wealthy men, gain access to their finances, drain everything, and disappear before they could recover. But this time was different. This time, her father was involved, and her father was running the biggest con of all. The telecom billionaire was bankrupt, completely broke. He'd been living on loans for 3 years, maintaining appearances while his empire crumbled beneath him. The partnership deal he'd promised Olamide was pure fiction, a beautiful lie designed to get access to my husband's company accounts. They weren't just replacing me with an upgrade, they were replacing me with parasites. I called my friend Falake, the only person I'd stayed in touch with from university. She was a corporate lawyer now, sharp as broken glass and twice as dangerous. When I told her everything, the silence on the phone lasted long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then she laughed, this dark, delighted sound that told me she understood exactly what I was planning. Adana, do you realize what you're telling me? You built that entire company. You own that intellectual property, and Olamide never registered it properly because he doesn't even understand what he has. We spent 3 hours on the phone that night, building a strategy that would burn their world to ashes. The law was surprisingly simple once Falake explained. I had timestamps for every piece of code, email trails under my pseudonym, payment records showing the work was mine. Olamide had been operating a company built entirely on stolen intellectual property, and he didn't even know it. He'd signed documents he never read, registered systems he didn't understand, all while thinking he was a brilliant businessman. I wasn't just going to divorce him, I was going to take everything. The company, the assets, the reputation he thought he'd built. I was going to strip it all away and leave him standing exactly where he'd always been without me. Nowhere. And Chidima and her fraud of a dad would go down with him. Karma wasn't just coming, I was hand-delivering it with legal documents and a smile.
Their engagement party looked like something out of a fairy tale, if fairy tales cost $500,000 and required 3 months of your salary to attend. I watched from across the street as guests in their finest attire walked into the venue Ngozi had rented, the same venue where we'd celebrated our own wedding 7 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. Society magazines were covering it. Photographers were everywhere. Ngozi was in her element, dripping in gold jewelry, telling anyone who would listen that her son had finally found a wife worthy of their family name. I stood there in simple jeans and a blouse, recording everything on my phone, taking notes, documenting their happiness. They had no idea I was building their funeral pyre one photograph at a time. But I noticed something they were too blind to see. Chidinma wasn't just planning a wedding. She was already running the show. I watched through the venue windows as she pulled Olamide aside, practically dragging him to a quiet corner where she shoved papers in front of him. Even from a distance, I could see her mouth moving fast, her finger jabbing at documents, and Olamide nodding like an obedient child. He was signing things, already. The trap was closing around him, and he was walking into it with a smile on his face because it wore designer perfume and called him baby. The next morning, I made my first move. Falake filed the divorce papers along with an intellectual property theft lawsuit that would make legal history. Then I did something beautiful. I remotely withdrew my entire code architecture from the company servers. Not deleted, withdrew. Every system I'd built over 7 years simply stopped responding. It was like pulling the spine out of a body and watching it collapse. Within 2 hours, Olamide's logistics company ground to a complete halt. Shipments couldn't be tracked, clients couldn't access their accounts, the entire digital infrastructure vanished like smoke. My phone started ringing immediately. Olamide's name flashed on the screen 15 times. I watched it ring and didn't answer once. Then Ngozi called, and this time I answered. I needed to hear this. Her voice was pure venom and panic mixed together. "What did you do, you witch? You cursed my son's business! You evil village girl, I'll destroy you! I'll make sure you never work again!" I stayed silent, letting her scream herself hoarse, recording every threat, every insult, every piece of evidence I'd need later. When she finally ran out of breath, I spoke for the first time, my voice calm as still water. "Ngozi, I didn't curse anything. I simply took back what was always mine." Then I hung up. The power in that moment was intoxicating. But the real entertainment was watching their perfect world crack from the inside. Chidinma's mask slipped fast when money got tight. I had friends who worked at the venue. Friends who overheard things. She was screaming at Olamide now, calling him useless, asking what kind of man couldn't even keep his own business running. Ngozi walked in on one of these fights and finally started seeing what I'd seen in my research. This woman wasn't elegant, she was cruel. Meanwhile, Olamide was desperately trying to fix the systems, hiring expensive IT consultants who took one look at my architecture and told him it would take years to rebuild, years he didn't have. Clients were threatening lawsuits, partners were pulling out, his empire was crumbling in real time. Then he showed up at my apartment, and for the first time since I'd known him, Olamide looked small. Broken. He stood at my door with tears in his eyes and said the words I'd been waiting for. "Adana, please, I'm begging you, come back. I'll fix everything. I was wrong." I let him stand there in my doorway, watching him crumble. This man who once told me I never contributed anything was now begging the woman he threw away like garbage. I didn't slam the door in his face. I did something worse. I invited him in, made him tea, and sat across from him like we were old friends catching up. His confusion was delicious. "Olamide," I said softly, "did you ever wonder how your company actually worked, like really worked?" He looked at me with those desperate eyes and admitted what I'd always known. He didn't understand coding. He'd never learned the technical side. He just knew it made him money and made him look smart. I smiled then, a real, genuine smile, and told him the truth he should have figured out years ago. I built it all, every single line. I have timestamps, emails, payment records under my pseudonym. I have proof of every piece of code, every system, every algorithm. Your company was never yours, Olamide. It was always mine. The color drained from his face like someone had opened a tap. 2 weeks later, we stood in the High Court for the intellectual property hearing. Olamide's lawyer walked in looking confident, probably thinking this was just another angry ex-wife making baseless claims. That confidence died the moment Falake opened her briefcase. We had everything. Code repositories with my digital signature embedded in ways only the original creator would know how to find, email trails between my pseudonym and various clients, payment records showing the work originated from my accounts before being transferred to his, bank statements proving I'd been funding the initial operations, bank statements proving I'd been funding the initial operations, bank statements proving I'd been funding the initial operations. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, looked genuinely fascinated. She turned to Olamide and asked him a simple question. "Mr. Olamide, can you explain the basic architecture of your company's tracking system?" The silence in that courtroom was deafening. He stammered, tried to use buzzwords he'd heard me say over the years, but it was clear he had no idea what he was talking about. The judge asked him 3 more technical questions. He couldn't answer a single one. Then she turned to me. I explained the entire system from memory, walked her through the specific backdoors I'd built for security, described the algorithms I designed for optimization, even pointed out a small Easter egg I'd hidden in the code, my initials embedded in a way only the creator would know how to find. When the IT expert the court had hired verified everything I said, Olamide's lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. But the real explosion happened 3 days later, on what was supposed to be the happiest day of Olamide's life. His wedding to Chidinma was scheduled at the most expensive hotel in Lagos. 500 guests, live band, champagne fountain. The media was covering it like a royal wedding. Ngozi had borrowed against everything to fund this spectacle, so desperate to show society that her son had upgraded. I wasn't invited, obviously, but I didn't need to be there to enjoy what happened next. Right in the middle of the ceremony, just as the officiant asked if anyone objected, the doors burst open. But it wasn't a dramatic ex-lover, it was the police, and they had arrest warrants. Chidinma's billionaire father was wanted for running a massive Ponzi scheme that had collapsed 3 days earlier. Investors had lost everything. The fraud squad had been building a case for months. And right behind them came Chidinma's previous victims, 2 men I'd contacted personally, ready to testify about how she'd destroyed their lives. The wedding descended into chaos, cameras flashing, guests screaming. Ngozi collapsed, her body hitting the marble floor with a sound I heard about later and wished I'd seen. The news cycle couldn't get enough of it. Every channel, every newspaper, every blog was running the same story with different headlines. Tech genius erased, wife built empire while husband took credit. The woman behind the fortune, how one man stole his wife's work. Social media exploded in my favor. Women from all over Africa were sharing their own stories of invisible labor, of brilliance hidden behind their husbands' names. I became a symbol overnight, and honestly, I hadn't planned for that part, but I wasn't complaining. Meanwhile, Olamide's world was burning to ashes. Business partners who'd praised his genius now couldn't distance themselves fast enough. Investors demanded their money back. His company, the one that only existed because of my mind and my hands, was being liquidated. And Chidinma? Well, she was sitting in a cell awaiting trial for fraud across multiple states. Her father was facing 15 years minimum. Ngozi's house, the one she'd put up as collateral for that ridiculous wedding, was seized by the bank. Karma wasn't just knocking, it had kicked down the door and moved in permanently. 3 months after the court verdict that awarded me full ownership of everything, Ngozi came to my office. My office. The building that used to display Olamide's name now had mine in bold letters across the entrance. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in 3 months. Her designer clothes were gone, replaced with simple fabric that had seen better days. She could barely look at me as she whispered that she needed help, financial help. Her friends had abandoned her, her society clubs had revoked her memberships. She had nothing. I sat back in my leather chair, the same chair Olamide used to sit in while I worked in the shadows, and I let the silence stretch between us until she started crying. "You called me a village girl," I said quietly. "You said I never contributed anything. You slapped me in my own home and threw me out like trash. Now you know the truth. I wasn't the village girl who got lucky. I was the empire builder who was kind enough to let your son put his name on my work." Olamide came next, a few days later, looking hollow. No more designer suits, no more confident swagger, just a broken man who finally understood he'd been living in a castle made of cards, and I'd been the foundation holding it all up. He asked, actually begged, for a job. Any position. He'd work his way up, he promised. He'd learn the technical side. He'd prove himself. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. You wanted someone on your level, remember? You found her, a fraud matched with a fraud. That's the level you were actually on, Olamide. I was never on your level. I was always miles above you, and you were too blind to see it. I rebuilt everything under my own name. Hired talented women engineers who'd been overlooked and underestimated just like me, created mentorship programs for young girls learning to code. The company tripled in value within a year because now it had honest leadership, innovative ideas, and a team that actually understood what they were building. I started speaking at conferences, telling my story, encouraging women to protect their work and their worth. At one tech conference I was headlining, I saw them in the crowd. Ngozi and Olamide wearing volunteer badges, working in the service section, handing out water bottles to attendees. Our eyes met for a brief second. I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction. Nothing. They were irrelevant now, just faces in a crowd of thousands who'd come to hear my story. I found love again, real love with someone who celebrated my brilliance instead of stealing it.